It was the first time I ever knew that God spoke to me. And he said, it's not what you lose in life that matters. It's what you do with what you have left.
Welcome to Me and Poverty, a podcast about breaking barriers, building bridges, and changing lives, one story at a time. Guys, today's guest, he's a new friend of mine. We met in kind of an unexpected way. So we actually spoke at an event recently together, well, separate but together for the event. And I am backstage waiting on my new friend's talk to start. Well, he goes on the stage. I go back further behind stage to practice my talk. I come back just a couple of moments later to my wife behind stage just absolutely bawling her eyes out. And I'm like, what happened? I have no idea what's going on. And she said, you have to hear his testimony. So I'm so glad after both of our talks, today's guest came up to me and he apologized for taking up too much time, but I wish he had spoken longer for the inspiration that he passed on to people. So we got to talking, and sure enough, here we are today. I'm going to let him tell a little more about his story, but today's guest is Terry O'Brien. Terry, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. I just love the opportunity. I don't really look at it as being just my story, but I believe it's like a paintbrush, and God painted this picture out of something that looked like tragedy to begin with. And I just love the chance to show people, not just to make them feel the hardships and what I have been through, but to see how that through faith in God, you can come through anything if you are willing to just trust Him and just never give up.
Amen to that. Amen to that, buddy. I'm going to ask you sort of the same question that I usually ask every guest to begin our shows. What is your relationship with poverty?
Well, my relationship with poverty, it kind of comes back to when I was a kid. My mom, at the time, she only had like an eighth grade education. My dad only had like a 10th grade education. And he was working at the time as an auto mechanic. He was a great mechanic, and he was making good money at the time. But then in September of '89, he became disabled and he was no longer able to work. So mom and dad had 5 kids, and the house we lived in, we didn't have central heating and air. We didn't have running water. Didn't know what cable TV was like until I was about 15 years old. But it come from the fact that we just didn't have a lot of money to do like stuff that other kids got to enjoy, whether it's the kind of clothing they could have or the kind of places they could go or the kind of vehicles that you had or the house that you lived in. But my relationship with poverty is not just being in poverty. But to me, a relationship with poverty is also the relationship as you understand what is poverty and what isn't. Like, there were times I never knew I was poor. I never knew that we were really in poverty because the way that our family was structured and the way that God was the center of our family. And then after that, the family was the center of everything. I never really knew. The only people that ever let me know that we were in poverty were those people who weren't. Kids can be cruel at certain ages and they remind you of what you do not have. But as I began to grow older and eventually got out of that, the type of poverty that we had, I appreciate everything that I have more because I know what it's like to not have it. And I feel like that people that never experience parts of that to a certain degree don't really understand the value of what they have when they have it because they don't know what it's like to live on both sides of that fence. I'm not living in poverty now. I wouldn't consider us anywhere near middle class or anything like that. But we don't struggle, like we did when I was a kid. But yet at the same time, the same values are in me. Even though my surroundings don't look the same, I'm still the same guy on the inside I was when I was growing up back there in it. And I think that's just me understanding the things that are the most important in life versus the things that are really kind of trivial at times.
There's this weird concept that goes around in my head all the time. People think that people that grow up in poverty, that they're almost at a disadvantage. There's a lot of ways that can be true, but there's also a resilience that gets built. I've got a quote in my upcoming book that says, there are thousands of students around the world thirsting for an opportunity. Just give them a drink. So there's this resilience that gets built as they're just chasing opportunity. Are you someone that works with youth on a daily basis? Maybe you're a teacher, a coach, youth service worker, maybe even a youth pastor. Or perhaps you know someone that works with youth that are facing tough circumstances. Too many youth feel trapped by the situation that they were born into and don't see a way out. I've created a 5-step guide specifically for youth that may be struggling. Each step gives practical, hope-filled actions that a student can take right now and start making their way out. Are you ready to make a greater impact on the lives of young people that you're serving? Click the link in the description of this video, grab your 5-step guide today, and let's start empowering the youth that you serve. I think that there is also a purpose that gets built through our poverty as a young person. Terry, could you tell our audience a little bit about what your day job is?
I am a 12th grade language arts teacher at Betsy Lane High School, and it's located in Floyd County, Kentucky, in a little
Okay.
town called Stanville. I didn't even know the school existed, when I started working there, because when I finally got into the MAT program through University of the Cumberlands, I wanted to be a teacher, and I originally grew up in Johnson County, and I went to a high school called Johnson Central High School, and I tried to get a job there, and I got shut down, and it was just because I didn't have experience at the time. And then I'm just scouring all over the internet, trying to find teaching jobs, and I come across this Betsy Lane High School, and I'm like, you know what? I'll hunt them down. I literally had a GPS. I lived in Floyd County and still had no idea where the school was. I ended up finding Betsy Lane High School, and I went in there to just to let everybody know, if I could. And this is during the summer, so there's no kids there, no teachers. And I go into the school, and just so happens the principal's there, and I just kind of introduced myself, let him know that I'd put in an application. Well, buddy, he took me and my wife and just took me on an entire tour of the school, and hadn't even looked at an application, hadn't even done any interviews, nothing. I'm telling you, the kindest man that I've ever worked for. And he was actually at the Mountain Arts Center that night, or that day when
Okay.
you and I spoke.
Yeah.
Out of all the high
Okay.
schools that was there, he was the only principal that came. Him and one of our assistant principals came as well.
Wow.
So he was the one. He was in the back where we were all sitting there on the left hand side when you're on the stage.
Sure.
And I remember when I was up there talking, I'm looking up, and I could see him in the back, and he's sitting there like this,
Yeah.
wiping his eyes. Because the day he hired me, him and the site-based council, he sat there and cried with me
Yeah.
because I was so happy that dream was coming true. But yeah, my day job is I teach a bunch of seniors and even some of the underclassmen at Betsy Lane High School. It's what I love to do, and it's what I feel like God intended for me to become one day.
What drove you to want to be a teacher? Why was that the dream job for you, Terry?
I came about that very unconventionally. It was not necessarily, when I got out of high school that's what I, wanted to be. I had went to college right out of high school, and I graduated 25 years ago. I graduated in 2000. I didn't stay in college though because a lot of things had happened at home, and I came back home, and I didn't finish school, and it was very many years after that. It was probably 2009 that I decided that I wanted to leave home, strike out, try to go back to college. Well, when I went to college, everybody was saying, medical coding and billing is really big right now, and that's what you need to get into. So I did. So in 2011, I graduated with my associate's degree in medical information technology, and I started trying to find a job. Well, guess what? Yeah, the market might have been, hot, but it had become so saturated I couldn't find employment.
Sure.
So my wife and I were in Walmart one day, and we ran into an old middle school teacher that I remember, and I was talking to her about it, and she said, well, why don't you try substitute teaching? And I'm going to tell you, I was mortified. Like, even all the years of being in the wheelchair, when it comes to being in certain environments I've never been in, that uneasiness still creeps up on me,
Sure.
especially if I'm dealing with middle school kids, sixth, seventh, eighth grade. Those are very awkward years. Kids don't have much of a filter at that point. Well,
Sure.
anyhow, I decided to try it. And ironically enough, when I did, I started to really like it.
Mm.
So there was a teacher there that was teaching an advanced algebra class, and it was for middle school kids that had tested high enough to take Algebra 1 for high school. So it was
Okay.
the high school Algebra 1 class, but it was had at the middle school. The irony of it was this: that teacher and that Algebra 1 class was the exact same teacher and the exact same Algebra 1 class that I didn't get to have my freshman year because of that car wreck I was in.
Wow.
Now, when I go there, she's pregnant, but she's around my age now. She's about 42, 43.
Yeah.
She developed gestational diabetes. So she had to go on early maternity leave for the last 2.5 months of the school year. At this point, I'd already been subbing for a couple of months, just in and out of different classrooms. She says, I want Terry to be the full-time sub in my class for the rest of the year. So that part alone felt like full circle, because the
Sure.
class that was taken from me when I was 14 years old because of my car wreck, I got to teach. So when that was done, all the other teachers there that still remembered me was ribbing me all the time. Go back to college, get your degree, be a full-time teacher. I wasn't interested at that point. I was done with homework.
Yeah.
I was done with buying college books. I was done with all that stuff.
Sure.
Well, anyhow, and the Lord works in mysterious ways.
That's right.
The class that I taught, where it was an advanced placement class, a lot of those kids was on the academic team. That year, they won the State Governors Cup Championship. However, they accidentally gave the trophy to the wrong school. So when they had figured out their mistake, the senators, governors, representatives, everybody come to our middle school for a huge presentation. All the big wigs in Frankfurt were there. So they set up a stage, and everybody's in there, all the students, all the teachers, and I'm over beside the door in the gym. And they start calling these students names. Well, like I said, a lot of these students were in my class. Without realizing it, I started to tear up because I was proud of those kids.
Sure.
When that happened, I kindly excused myself and went outside the door of that gym, and I sat in the hallway by myself in my wheelchair. And God brought a thought to my mind that changed everything. What other job could I ever do that would give me that kind of pride and that kind of joy than teaching? When that happened, that's when that dream became more than a dream. School ended that year. I immediately enrolled at the Southern New Hampshire University and started pursuing my degree in English language and literature. Now, I would like to tell you that's how the story ended, but not quite. So I finished the degree in English language and literature in 2015, 10 years ago. I'm like, all right, I want to get in the MAT program. I want to get a teaching job. This is going to be smooth transition. Remember the situation I was in when I got the first degree and couldn't find a job? Same thing when I got that one. I thought the only MAT degree that was available around here was from Morehead State University. And Morehead State University, from where I lived, was a really, really long drive away.
Sure.
And if you're not able to be in the classroom as a starting teacher in the MAT program, you still got to travel all the way to the university. And that was too far for me. I couldn't. So what happened? I found a job in a hospital doing the medical coding and billing that I had got the degree for back in 2011 or 2012. I'm doing that for about 2 years, right? I love the people I worked with, but a new company was coming in and they were going to acquire the rights to the hospital.
Sure.
And they already had their own billing company that was located in another place. So we knew that our department would be gone.
Right.
So about 2 years after that, I started talking to principals in high schools. And that's when this one guy that was a teacher of mine in high school, he said, have you ever heard of the University of the Cumberlands? I said, no. They said, well, they got the best MAT program in the state of Kentucky. I'm like, well, do you have to travel back and forth to the university? They said, no. I'm like, you're kidding. So I enrolled. I was less than a year into that MAT program when the job came open at Betsy Lane High School. My last day at that hospital was around the end of June of 2019. The new business acquired the hospital that fall.
Right.
God got me out of there in enough time to where I never lost the job. They still had to pay me for my brand new, not only a week before that, it rolled over to my new 2 weeks of vacation time. They paid that to me, and I started working that August. And it's been a roller coaster ride ever since.
I have no doubt of that. And it's fantastic to see how God not only does he like provide for you in the moment, you know, you get concerned about maybe a transition. Well, he's like, I got that. But then he goes beyond that and he's like, I got your next few, right?
Exactly. The one thing I've always found out is that if we continue to look at the obstacles and the mountains in front of us, the only thing we're going to realize is they're bigger than we are.
Mm.
But if we keep our eyes on God, we're always going to see that he's bigger than they are. So even though it was a really long way around, just like when I talked about the poverty, it makes you appreciate
Yeah.
what you have afterwards.
Yeah.
The long way around of getting into teaching to getting into education and having those kids in my room, you know, the fact that I'm not a dad, those kids, they feel like my own. And it's through these experiences at the school that I feel like that I would have been a good dad had I had the opportunity, you know, and the ability to be one. But that's the reason why I think God kind of put me in that position. You know, I'm not a teacher that happens to be a preacher. I'm a preacher that happens to be a teacher.
Yeah.
And that's the front, you know, foremost thing, the central part of whatever I do outside the school or inside the school. I'm the same guy here as I am there. And that's the one thing that I think that really connected with the students is that they can smell a phony a mile away.
Oh yeah.
And when you're genuine, when you are 100% genuine, and they can tell that you care. Like if the kids in these classes, if they can't tell that you care about them as a human being, then they are not going to care about you as a teacher.
Yeah.
You've got to make that personal connection first. And I thank God that he brought me around the long way, because I feel like that it prepared me maybe not to be the best teacher as far as a specific subject, but I think that it put me in the best possible situation to be a mentor to these kids.
I'm sure that school has just changed dramatically since I was in high school. I couldn't imagine what kids are going through nowadays, what they face compared to what even I did. What is an overarching message that you try to instill in the kids in your classroom nowadays?
Can I tell you the story behind it with the message?
Sure.
When we had that car wreck when I was 14, and this is going to also show some of my story. I just started my freshman year of high school. And we had only went 2 days. For some reason that year, school started on a Thursday, which I thought was kind of weird. So we went to school Thursday and Friday. So that was on August the 8th and the 9th of 1996. Well, August the 11th, that Sunday, we were picking my older brother up from McDonald's. That's where he had started working. He was I believe he was a sophomore. No, he's a senior of high school. And we picked him up, and on the way home is when that drunk driver crossed the highway and hit us head on, and ultimately, you know, I was paralyzed. When I was still in the intensive care unit in West Virginia at Cabell Huntington, still 14 years old, still trying to process everything that was happening and had happened. It was the first time I ever knew that God spoke to me. And he said, it's not what you lose in life that matters. It's what you do with what you had left. That message was given to me then. And I have lived by that. By the grace of God, I have lived by that for nearly 29 years. In my classroom, down through the 6 years I've been teaching, and partially even while I was substitute teaching, there are a lot of kids nowadays that have suffered things that I can't even fathom going through when I was a kid. Because like I told you, even though we lived in poverty from possibly a financial point of view, we still had a really strong family bond, and God was the center of our family. But there's kids out there that never had that. They were not taught that. They don't have that kind of strength and that resilience and that perseverance, and foremost, the faith. All they see is what they lose. And because of that, it draws them away mentally from what they have and what they can still achieve. So that is the underlying message. And it's not just what I tell them, but it's what I show them. They'll see me out there playing basketball with the kids. I get out there and play with them. Like we even had a game not long ago where I brought a spare wheelchair and they had to sit in the chair and play against me. And
That
I
is
do that kind of
phenomenal.
stuff because I want them to appreciate what they have. And
Yeah.
if I can get them to focus more on what they have and less upon what they don't have, then they understand that they can still achieve something. When God told that to me,
Hmm.
even at 14 years old, I knew I didn't have an excuse. I couldn't use my disability as an excuse. I couldn't use my shortcomings. And even as I've grown older, things that don't even pertain to the wheelchair, we all make mistakes. Like, I'll be honest with you, when I was growing up, buddy, if I'd done something wrong, my parents wore my hind end out. I was
Yeah.
disciplined, but they loved me. And
Sure.
the thing was, is that as I've gotten older, I've done a whole lot more dumb things as an adult than I ever did as a kid. But the one thing that my parents never let me do was feel sorry for myself. And they never babied me as if I couldn't do anything. They understood I was limited. They
Sure.
understood there was things they had to do. But they never let me stop trying. And the underlying message with everything I do to my kids is, above all things, God is first above everything. But that again, it's not what you lose in life that matters. It's what you do with what you have left.
I look forward to sharing that with more kids myself. So thank you for that. That's a gift to me, and I'm going to keep that in mind. Could you tell our audience a little more about your testimony and maybe why my wife was just bawling her eyes out that day behind stage, and I was just confused until I got to talk to you later? So could you tell our audience a little more about your testimony?
All right, well, I will give you a warning. Usually when I really tell this story, I get emotional myself.
Oh, sure, buddy. Yeah,
And I
that's
think that's the reason why
hey.
that
As long
people
as you're okay with it, I'm okay with it. Yeah.
that's the reason why that people cry, is because when they hear my story, they can tell that even after all this time, the effect is still there. You know, the emotions of it is still there, the memories of it, which I already alluded to, the car wreck. This woman was going 115 miles an hour, and she was drunk behind the wheel. And in a full-size van was my dad, my mom, my identical twin brother, which I do have an identical twin brother named Jerry, my older brother we picked up from McDonald's, and my sister. So there were 6 of us in this van. And this woman come across the median of the highway. My dad had enough time to grab the wheel and flip it. That's all he could do. At 115 mile an hour, there's reaction time is almost non-existent.
Sure.
I had dozed off in the van that night. It was a Sunday night. I had been studying. It was already trying to give us some kind of a test that early in school, but I was studying and I dozed off in the van that night. Well, all of a sudden I heard my mom scream, and she said, "Oh God, honey," when she was talking to my dad. And I turned and raised my head. I saw bright lights and everything went black. Didn't hear anything, didn't feel anything, all went black. A little bit later on, I don't know how many minutes it was. I couldn't tell you. There were still no ambulances, no police cars, nobody. I woke up. And when I woke up, I was folded over inside the chair that I was sitting in. I was folded in half, almost like a crab, or so to speak. And the only thing I could tell was that I was numb from the chest down. I wasn't in any pain, obviously. And I looked up, and this is when it gets emotional. When I talk about me, that's not the emotional part. It's when I talk about my family. I looked up, and my dad had collapsed behind me, because while I was out, it turns out that when he woke up, now listen, he had a severe concussion. His face was gored by all the glass out of the windshield. He had broken ribs from the steering wheel that had been driven into him, and he just went straight off of adrenaline. When he woke up, because of the heat of the antifreeze coming up, woke him up. Because the woman had hit us so hard that the V8 engine of the van was in the van. There was no front left. The V8 engine was between my parents' seat, like the whole engine cover that goes against the transmission was behind my parents' seat. That's how hard we got hit.
Right.
My dad, now I know the reason I know this part of the story is there's one person that was awake the whole time, and that was my twin brother. He witnessed all of it.
Wow.
My dad woke up. He looked over at my mom to try to help her out, and he couldn't. And I'll get more to the story about the testimony that pertains to my mom. But my dad got on his back. Now remember, 3 broken ribs, severe concussion, skin hanging off his face. When you're fighting for the life of your family, that adrenaline kicks in. You talking about fight or flight?
Sure.
My dad was trying to kick his door in, to open his door, but he couldn't because it had jammed everything in so hard, doors wouldn't open.
Right.
So my sister got thrown from the back of the van all the way to the front, head first into that engine. My dad grabbed her, picked her up in his arms. The only doors of the van that would open were the very back doors, the two double doors they had in the old vans. They opened on their own because the frame of the van had been driven about 6 foot past the body of the van. My dad took her out later on the median of the highway. When he crawled back into the back of the van, his body gave out and he collapsed behind me. That's when I woke up. When I woke up, I looked up like this and I saw my dad, his face. And he said, Bubby, he said, are you okay? And I said, well, Dad, I'm not hurting nowhere because I was numb. And he said, well, see if you can get out. And that was the first time I tried to move my legs. And I couldn't anymore. And that, all I could say was that, Dad, I can't move. And the one thing that I was taught because of how I was raised is I knew who to pray to. And I remember when I passed out again, I was praying. I woke up a little bit later. Again, the cops still weren't there. And my twin brother was down below me. And I know it doesn't make sense now, but you got to understand when you're in that moment and you're going through what we were going through. I had this thought in my head that if I couldn't help myself, if I couldn't get myself out, maybe I could get him out. And I remember reaching my left arm and I was trying to grab his leg and pull on his leg to try to help him out of the van. And that's when he screamed. He said, Bubby, please don't pull on me. And I didn't know he had broken his knee. My older brother that was in the other bucket seat, the one that we picked up from McDonald's, it literally took the bolts and ripped them out of the frame. It threw him head first into the big steel beam columns the sliding door latches into. When he started to come to, he raised up his head and he opened his mouth to say, Mom. When he did, all of his teeth, top and bottom, still in the gums, fell into his hand like false teeth. It ripped his entire dental bridge out. Shattered his jaw, broke his nose, split his forehead open, severe concussion, broke his arm, broke his leg, tore the ligaments loose from one of his fingers. He couldn't even move his finger because the muscle was no longer attached to the bone. I already told you what happened to my dad. My mom, she always had a habit of sitting on one of her legs. She would put one leg under her and sit. When Dad flipped the wheel, the head-on impact kind of shifted barely toward the passenger side. It took my mom's leg that was hanging down, and it drove it through the floorboard of the van. Every bone in her leg, from her hip to her foot, was broken. The skin was burnt off of her leg from her knee down from the antifreeze. Ripped 3 of her toes off. It just broke her sternum. My sister had a massive concussion and at one time had 3 blood clots to the brain. They told my dad that by him laying her on the median of the highway saved her life, because not long after he did that, it started to rain. The cool rain hitting her forehead caused the swelling to come to the outside instead of to the inside. And then the blood clots went away. She was spared. My twin brother, don't know what it was. We still today don't know what it was, but something cut a perfect upside down V through his sneaker, through his sock, and into his foot, and laid the skin off of his ankle. You could see inside his ankle. He told me that himself. And as for me, it crushed my spine. The 5 vertebrae were gone. It was like a bomb. I saw the x-rays. The bone fragments looked like shrapnel. Just exploded. And where it folded me up, it took the armrest, the metal part inside the armrest of my seat, and embedded it inside my right side, less than an inch away from the main artery. They had to dig that out of me when they got me out of the van that night. The woman that hit us basically severed her head and one of her arms. My mom was sitting on top of her when it was all done. The shattered bottle of vodka still between her legs. And to this day, to my knowledge, it is still one of the top 5 worst wrecks in Johnson County's recorded history involving alcohol. And I remember being in the hospital and I remember crying. I was in Cardinal Hill of Lexington. It's when I finally started to leave. I was in ICU unit for nearly 2 weeks. I was in the hospital for another 2 weeks. I was in another rehab facility for a week. Then I was in another hospital for a week. And then I was in another rehab facility for 2 weeks. But I remember being in that rehab facility and I was crying. And the psychologist, they had a patient psychologist that worked there. And she walked by my door and she heard me. And she opened the door and she came in. And she said, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "Why did that woman have to die?" I have never, in 29 years, had a hard feeling toward her. Not once. I would hug her neck now if I could. That little 6-month-old girl is now almost 30 years old. She's never knew what it was like to have her mother there to help her pick out a prom dress. Never know what it's like to have her mom there to help fix her hair when she gets married or to be there when she has her first child. And our lives were affected for the rest of our lives because of that. But I said here today, a miracle from God, because all 6 of us lived through that. My mom walks on that same leg. My brother eats with those same teeth. We're all still here by the grace of God. You want to talk about poverty? When you have something taken away from you that you didn't ask for. When you have something done that you didn't ask for, that you were not old enough to have to experience, and you feel like a great part of your childhood was taken from you. There's a lot of kids out there that suffer much worse than I did. But the thing is that the equation changes, but the answer doesn't. God is still the answer no matter what the equation is. He was my answer then, and he is still my answer now. It's not easy. As I'm getting older, the paralysis is getting worse. It's starting to affect me in other ways. But at the same time, my heart is so full.
Yeah.
And I would rather live like this and know who my God is and to know why I'm here than to be perfectly healthy and have no purpose.
I can't remember if I shared this with you. I grew up in Martin County, and I'm about 7 years old when Have you been through Martin County much? Do you know much about it?
My mom's family's from Martin County.
Okay, I feel like there was something there.
Bowens.
Yeah. There's quite a few. We're living on Black Log in Martin County, and my brother was 8 years old, 8 or 9. He is walking across the road from my cousin's house, and he's just kicking a can or a bottle across the road, and there's a person. This is a little 2-lane road, and they're driving 60 miles an hour in a 45. I think he said he was playing with the radio, just messing around with the radio, and never saw my brother. So he hits my brother going 60 miles an hour and knocks him 20 feet from his shoes. And they pronounced him... They pronounced him dead on the spot. And, of course, we didn't see any of it, but we heard it. We heard the tires, the brakes, and we could smell the rubber. Because our house was right up against the road. But there was before all the chaos, police, ambulance, all that, there was a woman that came and prayed over my brother. And he actually came back too. God decided that there was going to be more to his story, that he had purpose for him. So, I say that because I look at you, buddy. I couldn't help but tie your story to his.
When I knew he had called me to preach, and like I told you, I'm a 4th generation minister, but the one thing with our family, with my great grandfather, my papa, my dad, and even me, we never did it because of the tradition of the one before us. the way we feel like is that God doesn't call you because of your bloodline. He calls you because of his bloodline.
Amen. Amen, buddy.
I remember I started to lay down at night, and this started happening very frequently. And I was only 19. I've been a preacher since 2001, and I couldn't sleep
Hmm.
because all I could hear was the Spirit preaching within my mind. I could hear it plain as day, and I couldn't sleep. Didn't want to miss it anyway. And it began to happen over and over and over. And I said, God, are you trying to tell me something?
Yeah.
And that's when he let me know. He said, you need to preach my word.
Hmm.
That was the one moment. Like, it's one thing for God
Oh,
to
yeah.
tell you you're going to have a life.
Yeah.
But when God lets you know, now here's the purpose why you need to have that life.
Yeah.
And then once I started preaching and I started seeing the people I was able to touch, like being able to get my testimony out there is not something that I've been able to do all this time. It's something that certain moments in my life had to happen to get me to the point to have not only the opportunity, but now the ability. Because, some people think preachers are glorified public speakers, and that is not the case. There's a much bigger difference
Sure.
between somebody who can just speak
That's
and
right.
somebody who can speak with an anointing and with a spirit and with an authority that touches the hearts and the minds of those who hear.
Yeah.
If we go back to the Word of God, we find out that anytime Jesus done something, changes took place.
Yeah.
And I am a firm believer that he does that same thing in his people today. That when he uses us for whatever his purpose is, somewhere changes take place. And so I see changes that's happening in family members of mine. I see changes that's happening in students. We couldn't save ourselves that night in that car wreck. I couldn't save if I could have saved myself, why did Jesus have to come, hang, bleed, and die? I
Yeah.
could have been my own sacrifice. No. But whenever he let me know that I had a life, and he let me know that I was going to preach his gospel, and then I gotta go also to my wife. There's never a day that she treats me like I'm anything less than perfect in her eyes. Like the wheelchair does not deter. She will look at me. I could literally be getting up in the morning, my hair all messed up. I could have on a pair of jogging pants and a t-shirt, and she'll look at me and say, "You're so handsome." When she tells me that, I can feel that she means it.
Sure.
So there was three major things that God gave me to let me know is number one, life, a purpose, and love. And those things are the three main things that set everything in motion to where I knew I would have the ability to reach others.
Yeah.
Because he had given me things that people that are never in my condition never get to have. And because of that, I'm blessed anyway. I literally believe that with all my heart that I feel like that I am blessed among men.
Yeah.
Because that God has been so good to me.
I appreciate you saying that and kind of breaking down the difference of, yes, you're going to live, but there's more to it, right? That purpose, that calling.
Giving me the life was the what.
Sure.
But now once you have the what, well, what do little kids always ask? Why?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then once you tell them why, once they understand the why, the next question is the how.
That's right. I'm learning that with my 4-year-old. Yeah.
I'm learning that with my 18-year-olds at the high school.
Yeah. Yeah. What hobbies do you have, Terry?
I do this for church, obviously, but I play the guitar, bass, piano. Those are my three best instruments, and drums. But I can also play the harmonica. I can play the banjo some. I love being musically inclined. Dad always told me once he saw God start to bless my abilities to play music, that he told me, he said, I knew there was a reason that God made sure that your arms weren't paralyzed as well.
Wow.
So I love to do that. I love to draw. I was an artist even coming up through high school. Huge Michael Jordan fan.
Oh, yeah?
And if it's all right, if I just turn this camera just a second.
Oh, yeah. But give it a second to focus there. Come on.
There's a decent size amount of my collection.
Gosh, I'm jealous.
I also even have my own. It's small, but I have my own little small sports card business called JT Sports Cards.
Oh.
I have a YouTube channel.
Go ahead, plug it. What's the plug?
So if you want to look at it on YouTube, it's going to be the youtube.com, and it's going to be at JT Sports Cards 81. Now, the 81 was the year my twin brother and I was born.
Love it.
But he's a Kobe fan, so 81 points is also the points that Kobe scored against the Raptors, so I got to throw that in there for him.
That's cool.
But there's a reason why that I fell in love with following Michael Jordan. I remember before the car wreck, like I told you, we didn't have cable TV till I was 15, so I never got a chance to watch a basketball game,
Sure.
as far as professional or college. But all my buddies at school collected cards. I remember especially in 5th and 6th grade.
Oh, yeah.
So I started getting into all these Jordan cards that my friends had. And I remember that somebody had given my brother a gift. And years ago, this company used to be called Sports Pages, and they would print out these pages that you'd put in a 3-ring binder, and the front of it would have a picture of a famous athlete, and the back of it would be like just a whole bunch of information. Well, he got one about Michael Jordan, and I was reading the back of it. And I had found in there where he had this thing put in his contract called the love of the game clause. And no other NBA player had ever done it, because obviously, if a team is spending a lot of money on you, they want to protect, what you do and when you do it.
Yeah.
And Jordan said the only way he would play in the NBA is if they put a love of the game clause in there, which means it didn't matter if he was walking by a playground. Didn't matter if he wanted to go into a high school gym, that he was allowed to play ball anytime and anywhere he wanted to. Well, I loved the game, so I kind of connected with that.
Yeah.
But I have to bring this back to the wreck, because this is how the hobby continued. The wreck happens. I still love basketball. All I dreamed of was dunking. That's all I ever wanted to do, was to dunk. And before the wreck, I remember I got the rim for the first time when I was in 8th grade. I was tickled to death about that. But then, of course, the wreck happened, after that. And I remember playing ball the summer. We're talking no more than 2 months before this wreck happened. I remember playing ball on a playground, on a campground. We went camping that year, and I jumped up and touched the rim, and this guy says, "How many points you get for that?" And I'm like, none at all. So the wreck happens, and I still love basketball, and they find out that I do. So they take me out to this basketball goal. Now, mind you, this goal is now another 2.5 foot above my head than what it used to be. And I'm like, how do I still love this game?
Mm-hmm.
How can I still play? I can't do all the dribble between the legs I was doing before. I can't run, jump, or slide laterally to defend. I can't do all that. But I'm like, wait a minute, I can still shoot. The dribbling doesn't score you any points unless you're creating room to get off a shot.
Yeah.
So I could still shoot. So tying this in, and you'll have to research this on your own. Years ago when I was a kid, and we always wanted to watch Saturday morning cartoons, they came out with a cartoon that only lasted 1 season. And it was called Sports Stars, was the name of it. And it was the cartoon version of 3 major athletes: Michael Jordan, Bo Jackson, and Wayne Gretzky. Now, they acted like sports superheroes. They didn't have superhero ability, but they were like sports superheroes. And I remember being a little kid, and I watched an episode where these kids that had this local gym, like a YMCA, and it was kind of run down. And then here comes this big like tycoon in, and they're wanting to buy all the land up and level it and put up a condo. And they're trying to fight to save their gym. Well, here comes the Sports Stars, right? So the tycoon says, "We'll play you in a basketball game. Whoever wins the game gets the gym." Now, obviously, if one of the characters in the cartoon is Michael Jordan, he's going to take the lead on this. We've all seen Space Jam. We know how that turned out.
Right.
Halfway through the match, and I believe me, I have a reason to tell you the story. Halfway through the match, one of the people on the opposite team realizes they can't beat Jordan fairly. So they injure his leg on purpose. Now, this is a cartoon. Jordan is sitting on the ground, grabbing his leg, saying, "I can't help you now. I can't do anything." This boy said, "Yeah, you can." Here's a part of the story I hadn't told you yet. One of the little boys that was fighting to save the gym, the main character, was in a wheelchair.
Oh, wow.
He had Jordan in that cartoon sit down in a wheelchair and showed him how to turn that chair.
Wow.
They still won that game. Now, when I wanted to keep playing basketball and I loved Michael Jordan, I went back to that cartoon and I remembered that little boy, even though I know it's a cartoon, I know it was made up.
Sure.
I took that motivation and the fact that he had the love of the game clause, and then the fact that he had, in that cartoon. And I'm like, That's going to be my reality. And I started playing basketball. And I've been playing ever since, and I've been collecting Michael Jordan ever since. I still
So
have my first Jordan card.
okay, okay. I had a buddy of mine that encouraged me. This is it right before or during COVID to buy a couple of Jordan cards? Is when it peaked with the Netflix show. So I bought a couple and I went ahead and flipped them right after the show. So I did okay with them, but I of course wish I still had them. You know. So I think it was a 89 and a 90 year PSA 10. So I don't know what they're worth today. Probably less than they were. I don't know. I don't know if they tanked. I've been scared to look. Okay, I don't want to be sad by looking. Let's say you've got one of your students, they're struggling. What would you want them to know about God's presence during that suffering?
That it's only temporary,
Mm,
that there's always hope. You see, if you go to the story in the Bible, when the disciples were on the boat and the storm came across the Sea of Galilee, and they woke up Jesus in the bottom of the boat, and they said, "Carest thou not that we perish?"
right.
When Jesus stood up and he rebuked the winds and the seas, and they calmed, do you remember what it was he said immediately to them? "O ye of little faith."
Yeah.
But nobody's really elaborated on why he said that. Go back to the beginning of the story, before they got on the boat. Jesus said, "Let us cross over to the other side." If God is taking you to the other side, you can be sure you're going to make it through the storm.
That's
The
awesome.
storm is what allows us to understand who is in the boat. If the seas were calm, remember, Peter was a fisherman. Most of them were fishermen by trade.
Yeah.
If the seas were calm, Jesus was asleep in the boat, and they sailed across, who gets the credit of getting that boat to the other side?
That's right.
Peter and them do. But if they hit a storm that they know they can't whip, and yet they still make it to the other side, there's only one they can give credit to, and that's God. Like I said earlier, advancement comes through adversity. I've told my kids before that people are afraid of challenges, things that look hard. And this was something that I come up with, very recently. Challenges are just opportunities disguised as hard work.
Hmm.
Challenges are just opportunities disguised as hard work. When I run into a student that might be one that I feel like that you need a jackhammer to get to,
Sure.
and every now and then you're going to run into those kids that will not let you reach them. And that's a really hard pill to swallow because you want to reach them all. And you know the whole serenity prayer?
Mm-hmm.
God help me to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
The accepting something you can't change is the hard part.
Yeah.
I had to accept for myself, I can't change the situation of what happened to me, but I can use it to make sure that I do my best to change it for someone else, that my past doesn't become their future.
Yeah.
That woman lost everything. I lost something. She lost everything. If you don't give up, the only thing you're going to lose is something, but it doesn't mean you've lost everything. Any student that I have that is struggling, and most of them are struggling with life more than anything else, and I've told them many times, you have to let go and let God. You have to trust Him. And the only thing I can say is this: He's never let me down, and He won't let you down. I'm proof of that.
Amen to that, buddy. Amen to that. I'm out of time with you, but I'd love to talk more about, and we will eventually, I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll do another one of these.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
fully on board with it.
Awesome. And I'd like to share, and I think giving that teenager perspective. My I was abandoned. My grandparents raised me, and I had thoughts of harming myself and all of that, and God just intervening. So I'm just so happy that he loves me the way he does. I don't deserve it. It's cool to have these conversations as wonderful reminders of how great he is.
Can I add one last thing?
Yeah.
Sometimes when we make mistakes, Joseph, and we get down on ourselves,
Sure.
the first thing the devil wants to tell us is you're not worthy.
That's right. Oh yeah.
He told me that, and I said, well, buddy, join the club. I've known that for a long time.
Yeah. I've grown into that maturity, thankfully.
I do what I do, not because I'm worthy.
Mm-hmm.
I do it because he's worthy. So in the midst of your struggles, in the midst of your temptations, and in the midst of your failures, never forget God is always worthy. If you can remember that, then you can still fight through the times of your life when you feel like you are the lowest. Because as long as you're doing it because he's worthy, then you're doing it for him.
Yep.
And not for your own glory. I'm speaking to anybody that's watching this. I am not doing this for anybody to put me on a pedestal or to talk about how strong I am. The only thing that I've ever been able to do on my own is mess things up. But by the grace of God, he has given me the grace that I need to be able to be a light to others, not because of anything I've done, but because of what I know God has done for me. And what he's done for me, I know he'll do for you.
Terry, with that being said, I thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for being obedient to God probably telling you to, hey, go nudge Joe with your elbow at the conference we attended. I'm so appreciative that we got to cross paths, and hearing your testimony, I know it's inspired me, and it's going to inspire so many others. If you enjoyed his testimony, his inspiring story, and you want to hear more, make sure you like, comment on this video, and subscribe to the channel, and make sure you have your notifications turned on so you'll hear about future episodes. And remember, guys, keep sharing stories. See you in the next episode.